Hello and welcome to another episode of the djproject Criterion Collection. And here we're going to talk about Spine 436, Before the Rain, directed by Milčo Mančevski, 1994. Almost had it. Okay, this is one where I won't talk too much about the film itself in terms of the plot because the fun is figuring out how the whole thing works. But in so many words, it comprises of three stories that are interlinked, but they play out in an unusual way. The first story involves a young Macedonian monk. The second story involves a British photo agent, played by Carleen Cartridge. And finally, the third story involves a Macedonian war photographer, and I should have written down this name easily, Raid Srbecia. Probably botched that pronunciation too. It's one of those actors that you recognize his face, and it's easier to recognize his face than it is to say his name. So, my apologies for that. So, anyways, it's these stories that play out in a atypical order, and it's related to one of the phrases serving as a kind of adage or a little nugget of wisdom, and it's time never dies, the circle is not round. It's said at the beginning and at the end, but it's an interesting narrative. But what I am going to talk a little bit more about is the themes, and particularly its setting and the time that it was made. I grew up during the 90s. I was born in 1982, but I definitely remember the 90s. And the big world event I remember, apart from, I did remember the wall coming down. I did remember the fall of the Soviet Union, and I remember what happened afterwards, particularly in the Balkan Peninsula, where you had a plethora of ethnic conflicts all around the Balkan Peninsula in what was once Yugoslavia. You had Bosnia-Herzegovina, you had Croatia. Slovenia I don't think had as much, and then certainly Serbia had a lot. And but this film was made in and by a Macedonian director. And yes, I know that the name is quite contentious by a lot of ethnic groups, but for the sake of expediency, I'm just going to call it Macedonia. So I apologize if I infuriate certain people, but it's just for the sake of convenience and expediency, and just to not so please keep that in mind. But anyway, so it was made in Macedonia. Mančevski was himself Macedonian, and in fact, this was his first feature film. He had made some music videos, and one of them is included on here, Arrested Development's Tennessee, and he was also a photographer. So it was one of those carryovers and this is a story that he had thought about for quite a while, and so it was just a matter of pulling the resources together and pulling the right people and having that all work. And one of the things that I like, one of the things that's interesting is that Macedonia itself, apart from the name, didn't suffer didn't have the same problems that Bosnia and Serbia and other places had. And it was relatively unscathed by all the various ethnic conflicts, but it was still in the same region. I mean, you have Macedonians there, you have Albanians there, you probably have a mess of, there's a reason why the Balkans are as contentious as they are, and often what makes it worse is anybody outside the Balkans coming in and thinking, oh, we know how to fix this, oh, we know how to do the right job, and no, it doesn't. It led to World War I. It complicated the 90s. The Balkans are still a mess, and it's just because of It's just because there's a lot of, it's not as clear cut as you think. Even within a small region, within a larger country, you have a lot of different groups and a lot of different loyalties. So what makes this a really good setting for it is that while on the one hand it's not like you have an actual war going on, you can play act it and not have it be confusing, but it's also the same region that has the same problems, so it gives a certain air of for lack of a better word right now, authenticity. So in other words, it was a really good place to help illuminate that problem. And in the end, the story itself is more of a fable than anything. It's not, while it's rooted in real events, it's not, it's not based on any true story, but it's the kind of story that helps demonstrate, showcase the cycle of violence, where you have one vendetta that leads to another vendetta, and just this constant back and forth, and that's one of the things that really that plays out. And I think that's it. I'm trying to tie this back to the unusual narrative structure. It actually having that unusual narrative structure helps showcase the violence even more, because first off, you're trying to keep track of which event follows what. It's told slightly out of order in terms of time, and also stories kind of slightly overlap. So it's not a strict. So there is a strict divide, but it's not as strict. Again, time never dies. The circle is not round. But it adds to the illumination of cyclical violence, where you don't know really how it starts, and for most people, well, I shouldn't say that. I think for the people who are really into this, they know exactly how it starts. They can tell you exactly the year of where that grievance starts. But for everybody else, and especially if you have nothing to do with the conflict, with the direct conflict at all, you're just a victim of the crossfire, then it almost, the violence almost kind of feeds itself, and then it just escalates, and it becomes this bigger thing. And so in that sense, it's so I should say, on the one hand, I mean, there have been films before this that have covered that notion of the cycle of violence, but I think this was one of those this was the right film at the right time, in terms of, certainly in terms of showing what was happening in the Balkans, and it was an artistic way of reflecting onto everybody what was happening in the Balkans at that time. So if you have any interest in what's going on, I would definitely recommend Before the Rain. There's another film that Criterion put out a couple months ago. It was called The Forgiveness of Blood. I forget the director's name, but he also did Maria Full of Grace, and I have seen that, so I would be interested in checking that out. He said it's not as elaborate as this, and he doesn't cover so much. Actually, I think violence is covered, but not in the same way as Before the Rain. But it's also set in Albania, and I think the emphasis there is also about change and how does the village deal with change, and then I think there's also that sense of the tensions between people of various ethnicities and loyalties. Again, you get Macedonians, you get Albanians, and so you have all kinds of divisions based on ethnicity, based on culture, based on religion. Yes, Orthodox Christianity is in there. So any kind of cinematic showcase of that makes me happy. It makes me happy. And so if you want to see another example of that, It's there in a mild way. Actually, the really interesting part, and this doesn't really give it away. This is in the first story, because there's a monk there. There's a family that is chasing after this girl because, and this is part of the revenge story. And he comes into the chapel while they're having liturgy, and at some point the abbot comes out, and he addresses them, and during their exchange, the man who comes in says, "Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth," and he responds with, "Turn the other cheek." So the man operates under the Old Testament, he operates under the New Testament. And if you know the significance about both covenants, he is operating by the law, and he is operating by Christ, who is the fulfillment of the law. The law is only but a pale shadow of what would be revealed in time, and then what will remain even unto the end, even unto the ages of ages, to the end of ages of ages. Sorry. So so yes, it's I definitely recommend this. It got a lot of attention at its time. I believe it was another nominee for the best. Actually, I think it might have won. So I believe it was certainly nominated, but I think it actually won the best the Oscar for Best Foreign Film. So yeah, if you like that, if you like your unusual narratives, but all having a point, and particularly helping to illuminate what was going on in the Balkans, check it out. So yeah. Before the Rain. And until next time, take care.